The first bouquet of wildflowers appeared on Fiona Fletcher's doorstep on a Tuesday morning in late April of 1878, and she nearly crushed them beneath her boot before the splash of purple and gold caught her eye. Nobody in San Bernardino, California, had ever given her flowers before, not in all her 23 years of living, and she stood frozen on the threshold of the small boarding house room she rented above the general store, staring down at the humble arrangement as though it might be some kind of trap. The flowers were tied with a simple piece of grass stem, nothing fancy, just a collection of California poppies and lupines that grew wild in the foothills. Fiona glanced up and down the dusty street, but dawn had barely broken over the San Bernardino mountains, and the town still slept. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she bent to retrieve the bouquet, half expecting someone to leap out and mock her for her foolishness. The petals were still damp with morning dew, and they trembled slightly in her calloused fingers. She carried them inside quickly, shutting the door behind her as if she had smuggled contraband. Her room was sparse, containing only a narrow bed, a washstand, and a trunk that held everything she owned. Fiona had worked as a laundress in San Bernardino for 3 years, ever since she had fled her aunt's house in Sacramento, where she had been treated more like an unpaid servant than family after her parents died of fever. She earned enough to keep herself fed and housed, but little more, and certainly nothing for luxuries like flowers. Setting the bouquet in a chipped cup filled with water, Fiona studied them as she pinned up her dark blonde hair for the day. They brightened the drab room considerably, and something warm unfurled in her chest that she did not quite know how to name. She told herself not to get accustomed to such things. Likely it was a mistake, flowers meant for someone else and placed at the wrong door. By tomorrow they would be gone, and she would return to her life of hot water, lye soap, and endless scrubbing. But Wednesday morning brought another bouquet. This one contained wild roses and sage, the thorns carefully removed from the stems. Fiona discovered it when she opened her door to head down to the pump, and she actually gasped aloud. Her hands shook as she picked them up, looking around with more urgency now. Someone was doing this deliberately. Someone had thought of her. The question was who, and more importantly, why. Thursday's flowers were Indian paintbrush and buckwheat blooms. Friday brought more lupines mixed with delicate white forget-me-nots. By Saturday, Fiona found herself waking earlier than necessary, her stomach fluttering with anticipation as she approached her door. The flowers were always there, fresh and thoughtfully arranged, and she had begun to feel like a character in one of the dime novels she sometimes found discarded and read by candlelight. She asked around town with careful casualness, but none of the other women at the boarding house had seen anyone climbing the outside stairs to her door. Mrs. Chen, who ran the laundry where Fiona worked, only smiled mysteriously when questioned. The shopkeeper downstairs, Mr. Kowalski, claimed ignorance. Fiona began to wonder if she had an admirer who was too shy to reveal himself, though she could not imagine why any man would single her out. She was plain and poor, with hands reddened from work and no particular beauty to recommend her. Still, the flowers kept coming. It was on the second Wednesday, after nearly 2 weeks of mysterious bouquets, that Fiona decided to solve the puzzle herself. She went to bed fully clothed that Tuesday night, setting her internal clock to wake well before dawn. When she felt the shift in the air that signaled the approaching morning, she crept to her door and eased it open just a crack, positioning herself where she could peer out at the landing. The wait felt eternal. Her legs cramped and her eyes burned with tiredness, but she remained vigilant. Finally, when the sky had just begun to lighten from black to deep purple, she heard the soft tread of boots on the wooden stairs. The man who appeared was not anyone she recognized from town. He was enormous, well over 6 feet tall with shoulders that seemed broad enough to block out the dawn. He wore buckskin and a heavy coat, despite the warming spring weather, and his hair fell past his shoulders in dark waves that he had tied back with a leather cord. Even in the dim light, Fiona could see the powerful muscles of his arms as he knelt to place a fresh bouquet by her door, moving with surprising gentleness for someone so large. His face was weathered and tanned, with a strong jaw covered in dark stubble and features that looked like they had been carved from the mountain stone itself. There was something untamed about him, something that spoke of wild places and long silences, and Fiona felt her breath catch in her throat. She should have stayed hidden. She should have let him leave and continued the mystery. But something made her push the door open wider, and the hinges creaked softly. The man's head snapped up, and his eyes met hers. They were a startling shade of gray-blue, like storm clouds over the mountains, and they widened slightly in surprise. For a moment, they simply stared at each other, frozen in the growing light. Then Fiona found her voice, though it came out smaller than she intended. "You have been bringing me flowers." It was not a question, but he nodded anyway, rising slowly to his full impressive height. Up close, he was even more imposing, all lean muscle and contained power. But his expression held something almost vulnerable as he looked at her. "Yes, madam," he said, his voice a deep rumble that seemed to resonate in her chest. "I apologize if I have been too forward. I can stop if it troubles you." "No," Fiona said quickly, then felt her cheeks heat. "I mean, it does not trouble me. I only wondered why and who." A faint smile crossed his rugged features. "As to why, I suppose I thought you might like them. As to who, my name is Quinton Wade. I have a claim up in the mountains, been trapping and prospecting these past 5 years." "I am Fiona Fletcher," she said, though he must already know that to have found her door. "But how did you even know I existed? I have never seen you in town before." Quinton shifted his weight, looking almost bashful despite his intimidating size. "I come to town maybe once a month for supplies. Saw you coming out of the laundry about 2 months back, carrying a basket near as big as you are. You smiled at a little girl who ran past, even though you looked tired enough to drop. I asked around about you, learned your name and where you stayed." Fiona's heart was doing strange acrobatics in her chest. "And you decided to bring me flowers, just like that?" "Not just like that," Quinton said quietly. "I thought about it for a good long while, talked myself out of it a dozen times. Then I figured the worst you could do was throw them away, and at least I would have tried." The honesty in his words struck something deep within her. Fiona had spent her whole life being overlooked, being useful but never valued. The idea that this mountain of a man had noticed her, had thought about her for weeks, had walked down from his mountain claim every single morning just to leave her flowers, seemed almost impossible to comprehend. "I have never thrown a single one away," she whispered. "I have kept them all." The smile that broke across Quinton's face transformed him entirely. It softened the hard edges and lit up his eyes, making him almost boyishly pleased. "I am glad to hear that, Miss Fletcher. Real glad." They stood there awkwardly for a moment, the morning growing brighter around them. Fiona became acutely aware that she was standing in her doorway in a wrinkled dress with her hair falling loose around her shoulders, while this man who had occupied her thoughts for 2 weeks stood close enough to touch. "Would you," she began, then had to clear her throat. "Would you like to come in for coffee? I do not have much, but I could brew a pot." Quinton's expression grew serious. "I would not want to damage your reputation, Miss Fletcher. A man in your room this early would cause talk." Fiona almost laughed. "Mr. Wade, I am a laundress who lives in a rented room above a shop. I have no reputation to damage. Besides, you have been kind to me when no one else has been. The least I can do is offer you coffee." He considered this, then nodded slowly. "Then yes, madam, I would like that very much." Fiona stepped back to let him enter, suddenly very conscious of how small and shabby her room must seem to him. But Quinton moved inside carefully, as though afraid his size might break something, and his eyes went immediately to the collection of dried and fresh flowers she had arranged on every available surface. "You really did keep them," he murmured, wonder in his voice. "Every single one," Fiona confirmed, moving to stoke the small stove in the corner. "They are the only beautiful things I have ever owned." She heard him draw in a sharp breath behind her, but she focused on making the coffee, her hands slightly unsteady. When it was brewing, she turned to find Quinton studying her with an intensity that made her skin warm. "May I ask you something, Miss Fletcher?" "Fiona," she corrected. "Please, just Fiona." "Fiona," he repeated, and her name sounded different in his deep voice. "Why did you say you have never been given flowers before? Surely a woman like you has had admirers." Fiona shook her head, moving to sit on the edge of her bed since there was only one chair and Quinton was far too large for it anyway. "I am not the kind of woman men admire, Mr. Wade. I am poor and plain, and my hands are rough from work. The men in town look right through me if they notice me at all." "Quinton," he said, mirroring her earlier correction, "and those men are fools." He moved closer, then seemed to think better of it and leaned against the wall instead, arms crossed over his broad chest. "You are not plain. You have kind eyes and a gentle smile, and you move through the world like you are trying not to take up too much space in it. Makes a man want to give you more room, not less." Fiona stared at him, unable to formulate a response. No one had ever spoken to her like this, with such raw sincerity. "I apologize," Quinton said quickly. "I have been up in the mountains too long. I do not know how to talk to women properly." "No," Fiona managed. "No, you are talking just fine." The coffee began to boil and she busied herself with pouring 2 cups, grateful for something to do with her shaking hands. She handed one to Quinton, their fingers brushing briefly, and the contact sent a jolt through her entire body. They drank in silence for a moment, the awkwardness settling into something more comfortable. Outside, the town was beginning to wake, voices drifting up from the street below. "Tell me about your mountain claim," Fiona said finally. "What is it like up there?" Quinton's face eased into more natural lines as he talked, describing the cabin he had built with his own hands, the creek that ran cold and clear year-round, the way the sunrise looked when it painted the peaks pink and gold. He spoke of solitude and silence, of the rhythm of seasons and the satisfaction of living by one's own efforts. Fiona listened, enchanted, imagining a life so different from her own existence of endless laundry and cramped rooms. "It sounds beautiful," she said when he paused. "Lonely, though." "It has been," Quinton admitted. "That is why I started coming to town more often, why I noticed you. I realized I wanted more than just mountains and silence." "What do you want?" Fiona asked, surprising herself with her boldness. Quinton looked directly at her, his gray-blue eyes serious. "I want a home, not just a cabin. I want someone to talk to at the end of the day. I want what my parents had before the cholera took them, a partnership and companionship, and someone to share the beautiful things with." His words painted a picture that Fiona had never dared to imagine for herself. "That sounds wonderful. What do you want, Fiona?" No one had ever asked her that before. Fiona turned the question over in her mind, tasting the unfamiliar freedom of it. "I want to stop being invisible," she said slowly. "I want to matter to someone. I want to have a home of my own instead of a rented room. I want to grow flowers instead of just receiving them." Quinton smiled. "Those seem like good things to want. They talked until the sun was fully up, and Fiona realized with a start that she needed to get to work. Quinton stood to leave, and at the door he turned back to her. "May I call on you again, Fiona? Properly, I mean, not just leaving flowers." "I would like that very much," Fiona said, meaning it with every fiber of her being. "Tomorrow evening, then. I could take you to dinner if you would allow it." Fiona nodded, not trusting her voice. Quinton smiled that transformative smile again, then ducked through the doorway and disappeared down the stairs. Fiona stood motionless for a long moment, her coffee cup still clutched in her hands, wondering if she had just imagined the entire encounter. But the fresh bouquet of flowers on her table proved it was real. This time they were wild columbines, delicate and beautiful, and Fiona thought her heart might burst from the simple joy of them. The next day crawled by with agonizing slowness. Fiona scrubbed clothes until her arms ached, her mind constantly drifting to the evening ahead. The other laundresses noticed her distraction and teased her about it, but she only smiled mysteriously and worked harder. When Mrs. Chen finally dismissed them for the day, Fiona raced back to her room to wash and change into her one good dress, a simple blue calico that she had carefully maintained for 3 years. She had just finished pinning up her hair when she heard boots on the stairs. Her stomach flipped with nervous excitement as she opened the door to find Quinton standing there, cleaned up and wearing what must be his best clothes. His hair was still damp, and he had shaved, revealing the strong lines of his jaw. He looked slightly uncomfortable in the confines of town clothes, like a wild creature trying to pass for domesticated, but his eyes lit up when he saw her. "You look beautiful," he said simply. Fiona ducked her head, unused to compliments. "Thank you. You look very handsome." He offered his arm, and she took it, feeling the solid strength of him beneath the fabric. They descended the stairs together, and Fiona was acutely aware of the stares they drew as they walked through town. Quinton was hard to miss in any circumstance, but seeing him escorting her seemed to cause quite a stir. He took her to the best restaurant in San Bernardino, a small establishment run by a Mexican family that served food Fiona had only ever smelled from the street. Quinton ordered for both of them in fluent Spanish, which surprised her, and when she asked about it, he explained that he had spent time in California before the American takeover, learning from the vaqueros and mountain men who knew the land better than anyone. Over plates of enchiladas and rice, they talked like old friends. Quinton wanted to know everything about her, where she had grown up, what her parents had been like, how she had ended up in San Bernardino. Fiona found herself sharing stories she had not told anyone, about her father who had been a schoolteacher, and her mother who had painted beautiful watercolors, about the fever that had taken them both within a week when Fiona was 16, about her aunt who had taken her in, but treated her like an obligation rather than family. "So you ran away," Quinton said, no judgment in his voice. "I left," Fiona corrected. "I was 20 years old, and I knew if I stayed any longer I would disappear entirely. At least here I am my own person, even if I am poor." Quinton nodded slowly. "I understand that. I left Ohio after my parents died because my brother wanted to sell the farm and split the money. I wanted to keep working the land, but I was outvoted. So I took my share and headed west, figured I would make my own way." "Do you miss it, Ohio?" "Sometimes I miss my parents, but the land itself." "No, this is where I am meant to be." He paused, then added quietly, "I think maybe you are where you are meant to be too, otherwise I might never have found you." The words hung between them, weighted with meaning. Fiona felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she did not look away from his steady gaze. After dinner, Quinton walked her back to her boarding house slowly, as though reluctant for the evening to end. The spring air was cool and pleasant, and above them the stars were beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. "I have to head back up the mountain tomorrow," Quinton said as they reached her stairs. "I have been neglecting my trap lines to come down here every morning, but I will be back in a week, maybe less. May I see you again then?" Fiona felt a sharp pang of disappointment that he was leaving, followed immediately by guilt. Of course he had his own life, his own work. She had no claim on his time. "I would like that," she said. "Very much." Quinton reached out and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the gesture achingly tender. "I will think of you every day I am up there." "I will think of you too," Fiona whispered. For a moment she thought he might kiss her, saw the desire flicker in his eyes. But instead he stepped back, always proper, always respectful. "Good night, Fiona." "Good night, Quinton." She watched him walk away into the darkness, his broad shoulders and long stride making him look like he belonged to the wild places rather than the town. When he disappeared from view, she climbed the stairs to her room, where a fresh bouquet of mountain lilies waited by her door despite the fact that he had just left her. He must have placed them there before coming to collect her for dinner. Fiona brought them inside and added them to her growing collection, then lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of the evening. She had never felt this way before, like her heart was too big for her chest, like the world had suddenly become bright and full of possibility. It terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. The week that followed was the longest of Fiona's life. She worked her regular hours at the laundry, but everything felt different now. The other women wanted to know all about her mysterious mountain man, and Fiona found herself sharing details despite her natural reticence. Mrs. Chen smiled knowingly and told her that sometimes the best things came when you least expected them. There were no flowers by her door in the mornings now, and Fiona missed them with an intensity that surprised her. But she tended the ones she had carefully, changing their water and arranging them to last as long as possible. They were more precious to her than gold. 6 days after Quinton left, Fiona was walking home from work when she saw a familiar figure waiting by the boarding house steps. Her heart leapt, and she had to restrain herself from running. Quinton stood as she approached, a smile breaking across his face. "You came back early," Fiona said, unable to keep the joy from her voice. "Could not stay away," Quinton admitted. "I kept finding excuses to come down. Finally just gave up and packed my gear." "Packed your gear?" He looked almost nervous. "I was hoping you might show me around town a bit, if you have time. I have never spent much time in San Bernardino proper, and I figured if I am going to be coming down more often, I should get to know the place better." Fiona understood what he was really saying. He was making an effort to be part of her world, not just his mountain solitude. The thoughtfulness of it made her throat tight with emotion. Over the next 2 weeks, they fell into a pattern. Quinton would arrive in the evening after Fiona finished work, and they would walk together through the streets of San Bernardino, talking about everything and nothing. He told her stories of his years in the mountains, of encounters with bears and mountain lions, of finding veins of silver that never quite panned out but kept him hopeful. She shared her dreams of someday having a garden, of learning to read better so she could enjoy more books, of seeing the ocean that she had heard so much about but never witnessed. Quinton listened to everything she said like it mattered, like her small hopes and dreams were as important as his grand adventures. He bought her books from the general store, simple primers and volumes of poetry that he would read aloud to her in the evenings, his deep voice turning the words into music. He brought her packets of seeds for flowers and vegetables, telling her she could plant them wherever she wanted, even if it was just in pots on her windowsill for now. For her part, Fiona introduced him to the people of the town, smoothing his way in social situations where his size and wild appearance sometimes made people wary. She taught him the latest dances at a community gathering, laughing as his mountain man grace translated awkwardly to the structured steps. She showed him the parts of San Bernardino she had grown to love, the small Mexican church with its beautiful bells, the creek where children played, the view of the mountains at sunset. They were building something together, Fiona realized, a life that combined both their worlds. One evening, nearly a month after their first dinner together, Quinton took Fiona on a longer walk than usual, leading her out to the edge of town where the buildings gave way to scrubland. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and the mountains loomed purple in the distance. "I want to show you something," Quinton said, his voice carrying a note of anticipation. He helped her up onto his horse, a sturdy bay mare he had brought down from the mountain, then swung up behind her. Fiona's breath caught at the feeling of his strong arms around her as he guided the horse up a narrow trail. They rode for perhaps 20 minutes, climbing into the foothills until they reached a small plateau that overlooked the entire valley. Quinton dismounted and helped Fiona down, his hands lingering at her waist. "Look," he said, turning her to face west. The view stole her breath. The entire San Bernardino Valley spread out below them, the town a small cluster of lights beginning to glow in the gathering dusk. Beyond that, the land rolled away toward the distant coast, and the sky above was a masterpiece of color. "This is one of my favorite spots," Quinton said softly. "I come here sometimes when I need to think. I wanted to share it with you." Fiona turned to look at him and found his eyes already on her, intense and searching. "Thank you for bringing me here." "Fiona," he said, and something in his tone made her heart race. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear me out before you respond." She nodded, suddenly nervous. Quinton took a deep breath. "I have never been good with words, always been better with actions, but you deserve words, deserve to know what is in my heart. I have fallen in love with you. I think I started falling that first time I saw you with that laundry basket, and I have not stopped since. You make me want to be part of the world again instead of hiding in the mountains. You make me want to build something lasting, something real." Fiona felt tears prick her eyes. "Quinton, I know I do not have much to offer," he continued, the words coming faster now like he needed to get them all out. "I am rough around the edges and I live in a cabin miles from anywhere. But I would spend every day of my life trying to make you happy if you would let me. I would build you the finest house I could manage, plant you gardens full of flowers, give you everything within my power to give." "Quinton," Fiona said again, her voice shaking. "I do not need a fine house or grand gestures. You have already given me more than anyone else ever has. You see me. You value me. You make me feel like I matter." "You do matter," he said fiercely. "You matter more than anything." Fiona reached up to cup his bearded jaw, feeling the roughness of his skin against her palm. "I have fallen in love with you too. I did not even know what love felt like until you started leaving flowers at my door. But I know now. It feels like coming home." The relief and joy that washed over Quinton's face was beautiful to see. He covered her hand with his own, pressing it more firmly against his cheek. "I want to marry you, Fiona. I want you to be my wife. Will you have me?" "Yes," Fiona said, and then again, louder, more certain. "Yes, yes, I will marry you." Quinton let out a whoop of joy that echoed across the valley, then swept her up in his arms and spun her around. When he set her down, he cupped her face in his large, calloused hands and kissed her with a tenderness that made her knees weak. His lips were soft against hers, the kiss gentle and questioning at first, then deeper as Fiona wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him back with all the emotion flooding through her. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Quinton rested his forehead against hers. "I will make you happy, Fiona, I swear it." "You already do," she whispered back. They stood there as the sun finished setting, wrapped in each other's arms, and Fiona thought about how strange life could be. A month ago she had been alone and invisible, convinced that her life would never be more than work and solitude. Now she was engaged to a mountain man who brought her flowers and looked at her like she hung the moon and stars. The ride back to town was slower, both of them reluctant to return to the real world. But when Quinton left her at her boarding house stairs, he kissed her again, sweetly, and promised to return the next day to begin making arrangements for their wedding. Fiona floated up the stairs to her room, feeling like she might actually take flight. She lit her lamp and looked around at the small space that had been her entire world for 3 years. Soon, she would leave it behind for a new life in the mountains with Quinton. The thought was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. The next weeks were a whirlwind of preparation. Fiona gave notice at the laundry, and Mrs. Chen hugged her tightly, genuinely happy for her success. The other women threw her a small party, gifting her with practical items for her new life. Sturdy fabric for making clothes, preserved foods, a beautiful quilt that they had all worked on together in secret. Quinton spent his time preparing his cabin for a wife, riding back and forth between the mountain and town as he made improvements. He described it all to Fiona in the evenings, how he was building an addition for a proper bedroom, installing glass windows he had ordered from Los Angeles, constructing a root cellar for storage. He wanted everything to be perfect for her. They were married on a warm day in early June of 1878, in the small church Fiona had shown him weeks before. She wore a simple white dress that one of the seamstresses in town had helped her make, and carried a bouquet of wildflowers that Quinton had picked that morning. He wore a new suit that strained across his broad shoulders, his long hair neatly tied back, looking uncomfortable but determined. The ceremony was small, attended by the friends Fiona had made in San Bernardino, and a few trappers and prospectors who knew Quinton from the mountains. When the priest pronounced them man and wife, and told Quinton he could kiss his bride, he did so with such obvious love and joy that several women in the congregation wiped away tears. Afterward, there was a simple celebration at the boarding house, with food and music and dancing. Fiona danced with her new husband, feeling his strength as he guided her through the steps, seeing the future stretching out before them bright with possibility. As the afternoon wore into evening, Quinton leaned down to whisper in her ear, "Ready to see your new home, Mrs. Wade." The name sent a thrill through her. More than ready. They said their goodbyes and Quinton helped Fiona onto his horse, her few possessions already packed and loaded on a second mount. They rode out of San Bernardino as the sun began to set, heading up into the mountains that would now be Fiona's home. The journey took several hours, following narrow trails that climbed steadily higher. Fiona held onto Quinton, trusting him to navigate the darkening path. Above them, stars emerged one by one, more than she had ever seen from town, and the air grew cooler and scented with pine. Finally, they emerged into a small clearing and Fiona caught her breath. The cabin Quinton had built sat nestled against the mountainside, larger than she had imagined, with light glowing warmly through real glass windows. Wildflowers grew all around it, clearly planted rather than accidental, and a vegetable garden stretched out to one side, already sprouting green. "You planted flowers," Fiona said, her voice thick with emotion. "Of course," Quinton said simply. "You wanted a garden, I wanted to give you one." He dismounted and helped her down, then before she could take a step toward the cabin, he swept her up into his arms. "Got to carry you over the threshold, Mrs. Wade," It is tradition." Fiona laughed and wrapped her arms around his neck as he carried her to the door, kicked it open gently, and bore her inside. The interior of the cabin was warm and welcoming, with a large stone fireplace, sturdy furniture that Quinton had clearly made himself, and more windows than most mountain cabins boasted. Everything was clean and ready for her, from the neatly made bed in the new addition to the supplies stocked in the kitchen area. But what caught Fiona's attention most were the flowers. They were everywhere, in jars and cups and makeshift vases, fresh wildflowers of every color filling the cabin with beauty and fragrance. "I wanted your first night here to be special," Quinton said, setting her down gently. He suddenly looked uncertain, vulnerable in a way she had never seen him. "I know it is not much compared to a real house in town, but—" Fiona silenced him with a kiss, pouring everything she felt into it. When she pulled back, she was smiling through tears. "It is perfect. Everything is perfect. You are perfect." "I am far from perfect," Quinton said, but he was smiling too. "But I will try to be worthy of you every day." That night, as they lay together in their marriage bed, Fiona thought about the journey that had brought her here. All the loneliness and hardship of her life had led to this moment, to this man, to this new beginning. Quinton held her close, his strong arms making her feel safe and cherished, and she knew with absolute certainty that she had found where she belonged. In the morning, Fiona woke to find Quinton already up, and when she emerged from the bedroom, he presented her with another bouquet of fresh wildflowers, grinning like a boy. "I figured just because we are married does not mean I should stop," he said. Fiona took the flowers and kissed him soundly. "Do not you dare stop. Ever." The days that followed settled into a rhythm that felt natural despite being so different from anything Fiona had known before. She learned the patterns of mountain life, how to manage the cabin and the gardens, how to preserve food and prepare for the changing seasons. Quinton taught her to fish in the nearby creek, to identify edible plants and animal tracks, to read the weather in the clouds and wind. In turn, Fiona brought civilization to the mountain. She organized the cabin, created systems for storage and cleaning, cooked meals more varied than the simple fare Quinton had survived on for years. She read to him in the evenings from the books he had given her, her voice growing more confident as her reading improved. She planted more flowers and vegetables, expanding the gardens until they were a riot of color and productivity. But more than the practical contributions, Fiona brought companionship. Quinton had not realized how lonely he had been until he had someone to share his days with. They talked endlessly, about everything and nothing, filling the cabin with words and laughter that had been absent for so long. They worked side by side, Quinton checking his trap lines and panning for gold while Fiona managed the homestead, but always coming back together at day's end. Summer passed into autumn, the mountains putting on a show of red and gold that took Fiona's breath away. Quinton taught her to shoot, patiently correcting her form until she could reliably hit a target, insisting she needed to be able to protect herself when he was away from the cabin. He showed her his favorite places, secret meadows and high peaks, waterfalls and caves, sharing the wild country that he loved. For the first time in her life, Fiona felt truly happy. Not just content or resigned, but genuinely joyful. She woke each morning eager to see what the day would bring, and fell asleep each night wrapped in Quinton's arms, feeling treasured and safe. As autumn deepened, Quinton began preparing for winter in earnest. He cut firewood until they had a massive stack against the cabin wall, repaired the roof and chinked any gaps in the logs, hunted and preserved meat to supplement their stores. Fiona helped however she could, learning to can and smoke and dry foods to make candles and soap, to prepare for the months when they would be snowed in. "Are you frightened?" Quinton asked her one evening as the first snow began to fall. "Of being stuck up here all winter with just me for company?" Fiona looked at him, this strong, gentle man who had changed her entire world, and smiled. "Frightened? No. It sounds wonderful, actually. No distractions, no obligations, just us." Quinton pulled her into his lap, holding her close as they watched the snow fall through the window. "I love you, Fiona Wade, more than I ever thought I could love anyone." "I love you too," Fiona said, snuggling against his broad chest. "More than words can say." Winter did come, fierce and beautiful, burying the cabin in snow and ice. But inside, Fiona and Quinton created their own warmth. They spent the long, dark evenings by the fire, talking and reading and planning for the future. Quinton taught Fiona to play chess with a set he had carved himself, and she proved to be a quick study, beating him within a few weeks. They cooked elaborate meals together, experimenting with their limited ingredients to create new dishes. They made love and talked and simply existed together in a contentment that felt almost sacred. When the snow trapped them inside for days at a time, they did not grow restless or irritable as Fiona had feared. Instead, they seemed to draw closer, learning the quiet intimacy of comfortable silence and shared space. One particularly fierce blizzard kept them inside for nearly a week straight. On the third day, as wind howled around the cabin and snow piled against the door, Fiona felt a wave of nausea that sent her running for the wash basin. Quinton was at her side immediately, holding her hair back and rubbing her back with gentle concern. "Are you ill?" he asked worriedly. "Did you eat something bad?" But Fiona had a sudden suspicion, confirmed by other small signs she had been ignoring. The tenderness in her breasts, the fatigue that had been creeping up on her, the way certain smells had started bothering her. She straightened slowly, wiping her mouth, and met Quinton's concerned gaze. "I do not think I am ill," she said carefully. "I think I might be with child." Quinton's eyes went wide, and for a moment he just stared at her. Then a smile spread across his face, so bright and joyful that it lit up the entire cabin. "Truly, you think you are carrying our baby?" Fiona nodded, her own smile breaking free. "I cannot be certain yet, but all the signs are there." Quinton whooped and picked her up, spinning her around before carefully setting her down again, suddenly anxious. "I should not have done that. I might have hurt you or the baby. Are you all right? Do you need to sit down? Should you be resting?" Fiona laughed, warmth flooding through her at his obvious joy and concern. "I am fine. The baby is fine. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time, Quinton. I am not made of glass." But he fussed over her anyway, insisting she sit by the fire while he made her tea, bringing her extra blankets and pillows. Fiona let him, secretly pleased by his attentiveness. She had not known how he would react to the news of a child, but his pure delight erased any lingering worries. That night, as they lay in bed with Quinton's large hand spread protectively over her still flat stomach, he spoke quietly into the darkness. "I am going to be a father. I keep saying it in my head, trying to make it feel real. Are you happy about it?" Fiona asked, though she already knew the answer. "Happy does not even begin to cover it," Quinton said. "I am terrified and thrilled and grateful all at once. We are going to have a baby, Fiona. A little person who is part of both of us." Fiona covered his hand with her own. "We are going to be parents. It is rather overwhelming when you think about it." "We will figure it out," Quinton said firmly. "Together, just like we have figured out everything else." The rest of the winter took on a new dimension as they prepared not just for spring, but for the arrival of a child. Quinton began planning an expansion to the cabin to create a nursery, sketching designs and calculating materials. Fiona started sewing tiny clothes from scraps of fabric, her hands creating impossibly small garments with growing wonder. They talked endlessly about names and possibilities, about what kind of parents they wanted to be, about the life they would build for their child. Quinton was determined that their baby would grow up knowing it was loved and wanted, never feeling like a burden the way he had felt with his brother. Fiona wanted their child to have opportunities she had never had, to be educated and encouraged to dream big. When spring finally came and the snow began to melt, Quinton made a trip down to San Bernardino to consult with the doctor and stock up on supplies. He returned with not just medical advice and baby items, but with news that he had sold some of his gold findings for a good price, enough to make significant improvements to their home and ensure they would be comfortable for years to come. "I want you to have the best care when the baby comes," he explained, showing Fiona the various supplies he had purchased. "The doctor said he could come up here when it is time, or we could go to town if you prefer. Whatever makes you most comfortable." Fiona considered this. "I think I would rather be here in our home, but having the doctor come would give me peace of mind." Quinton nodded decisively. "Then that is what we will do. I will make sure the trails are clear and well marked so he can find his way easily." As summer returned to the mountains, Fiona's belly grew round and pronounced. She felt the baby move for the first time in late May, a flutter like wings against her ribs, and she grabbed Quinton's hand to place it where she had felt the movement. His face when he felt their child kick for the first time was something she would remember forever, pure wonder and love. He talked to the baby constantly, his deep voice rumbling against Fiona's skin as he told their unborn child about the world waiting outside. He described the mountains and valleys, the animals and plants, the stars and seasons. He promised to teach the baby everything he knew to keep it safe, to love it unconditionally. Fiona's gardens flourished that summer, as though responding to her own fertility. The flowers Quinton still brought her every morning were supplemented by the blooms from her own plants, creating an abundance of color around the cabin. She spent hours tending them, talking to the baby as she worked, describing the different flowers and their meanings. In early August, when the heat made the cabin stifling despite the mountain altitude, Fiona's labor began. It started with mild cramps that gradually intensified, and Quinton rode immediately for the doctor while a neighbor woman who lived several miles away came to stay with Fiona. The woman, a tough old frontierswoman named Harriet, had delivered dozens of babies and kept Fiona calm and focused as the contractions grew stronger. Quinton returned with the doctor in record time, having pushed both himself and his horse to their limits. He burst into the cabin wild-eyed and worried, but Harriet shooed him out again, saying he could come back when there was something for him to do besides pace and fret. But Fiona called for him, needing him near despite the conventions. "Please," she said, "I want my husband with me." The doctor looked uncertain, but Harriet shrugged. "Her labor, her choice. Just stay out of the way and do not faint." Quinton stayed, holding Fiona's hand through the long hours of labor, wiping her face with cool cloths, whispering encouragement when she felt like she could not go on. His presence anchored her, gave her strength when her own was flagging. Finally, as the sun set and painted the mountains gold, their baby entered the world with a lusty cry. The doctor cleaned and examined the infant, then smiled as he wrapped the baby in a soft blanket. "Congratulations," he said, handing the bundle to Fiona. "You have a healthy baby boy." Fiona looked down at her son, at his tiny red face and shock of dark hair, and felt her heart expand beyond all measure. Quinton leaned over them both, his eyes wet with tears, one large finger tentatively touching their baby's small hand. The infant's fingers curled around Quinton's, gripping tight, and a sob escaped the big man's throat. "He is perfect," Quinton whispered. "Absolutely perfect." "What should we name him?" Fiona asked, unable to look away from their son's face. They had discussed names endlessly over the winter, but now faced with the reality of their child, all those names seemed inadequate. Quinton studied their baby thoughtfully. "James," he said finally. "After your father, James Fletcher Wade." Fiona looked up at him with swimming eyes. "You remembered my father's name." "Of course I did," Quinton said gently. "You said he was a good man, a teacher who believed in knowledge and kindness. Those seem like good qualities to aspire to." "James," Fiona repeated, testing the name. Their son yawned and she laughed softly. "I think he approves." The doctor and Harriet stayed for a few hours to ensure mother and baby were doing well, then departed with promises to check in within the week. Quinton saw them out with profound thanks and generous payment, then returned to the bedroom where Fiona was nursing James for the first time. He stood in the doorway watching them, his wife and his son, and felt so much love he thought he might shatter from it. This life he had built seemed impossible, a dream beyond anything he had dared imagine when he first came to these mountains alone and grieving. But here it was, real and precious and his. "Come here," Fiona said softly, and Quinton moved to sit carefully on the bed beside them. She leaned against him and he wrapped his arm around her shoulders, the three of them forming a unit. "Thank you," Quinton said quietly. "For what?" "For taking a chance on a rough mountain man who left flowers at your door. For building this life with me. For giving me a son, for everything." Fiona tilted her head to kiss his jaw. "Thank you for seeing me when no one else did. For showing me what love looks like. For making all my dreams come true." They sat together in the gathering darkness, lit only by a single lamp, and watched their son fall asleep, milk-drunk and content. Outside, the mountains stood eternal and solid, witness to this small perfect moment of joy. The weeks that followed were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. James proved to be a healthy, hungry baby who rarely slept more than a few hours at a stretch. Fiona and Quinton stumbled through those early days of parenthood bleary-eyed and confused, learning through trial and error what their son needed. Quinton proved to be a devoted father, taking to the role with the same intense focus he brought to everything else. He would walk the cabin floor for hours with James against his broad shoulder when the baby was fussy, singing old songs his own mother had taught him in a rumbling bass. He changed diapers without complaint and learned to swaddle the baby tightly the way Fiona showed him. He built a beautiful cradle from smooth pine, carving designs of mountains and flowers into the wood. Fiona watched him with their son and fell even more deeply in love. She had known Quinton would be a good father, but seeing the gentleness he showed despite his size and strength, the patience he exhibited even when exhausted, made her heart ache with affection. As James grew, his personality began to emerge. He was a curious baby, his gray-blue eyes so like his father's tracking movement around the cabin with intense interest. He smiled early, beaming up at his parents with toothless joy that made all the sleepless nights worthwhile. His first laugh, prompted by Quinton making silly faces, was so delightful that they both tried to coax it out of him constantly. Life on the mountain settled into a new normal, busier and louder than before, but richer for it. Quinton still brought Fiona fresh flowers every morning, placing them where she could see them while she nursed or rocked the baby. It had become a ritual that marked the days, his way of continuing to court her even though they were already married and had a child. When James was 6 months old and the weather was pleasant, Fiona suggested they make a trip to San Bernardino to show him off to the friends she had made there. Quinton agreed readily, always willing to give her what she wanted, and they packed up for the journey down the mountain. The town was much as Fiona remembered, though it seemed smaller now after months of mountain vistas. But the people welcomed her warmly, exclaiming over baby James and congratulating them both. Mrs. Chen held the baby with practiced ease, declaring him handsome and strong like his father. The women from the laundry brought gifts of clothes and blankets they had made. Fiona realized with some surprise that she had a community here, people who cared about her well-being and were genuinely happy for her success. It was touching and bittersweet, a reminder of what she had left behind, but also confirmation that she had made the right choice in following Quinton to the mountains. They stayed in town for 2 days, visiting and restocking supplies, then headed back up to their mountain home. As they rode the familiar trails with James bundled safely in a sling against Quinton's chest, Fiona felt a deep sense of contentment. This was her life now, split between the civilization of the valley and the wilderness of the peaks, anchored by the love of her husband and child. The seasons turned again, autumn giving way to another winter. This one felt less isolating than the last, with James providing constant entertainment and purpose. He grew rapidly, hitting milestones that filled his parents with pride. He learned to roll over, to sit up, to crawl with determined intensity toward anything that caught his interest. Quinton Baby proofed the cabin as best he could, moving anything dangerous out of reach and creating safe spaces for James to explore. He built toys from wood, simple blocks and animals that James mouthed, and studied with great concentration. Fiona made picture books from scraps of fabric, teaching their son colors and shapes and animal names. On James's first birthday, they had a small celebration with the few neighbors who lived within visiting distance. Fiona baked a cake from precious hoarded sugar and dried fruit, and Quinton presented James with a rocking horse he had carved and painted. The baby, not quite understanding the fuss but delighted by the attention, smeared cake everywhere and laughed himself silly. That night, after James was asleep and the cabin cleaned up, Quinton pulled Fiona into his arms. "Can you believe it has been almost 2 years since I first left flowers at your door?" Fiona thought back to that morning, to her shock and confusion at finding the first bouquet. "It feels like a lifetime ago. I am not the same person I was then." "Neither am I," Quinton agreed. "You changed me, Fiona, made me better." "We changed each other," Fiona corrected. "That is what love does." They stood swaying gently, a habit formed from months of rocking a baby, and looked around at the life they had built. The cabin was warm and full of evidence of their small family. James's toys scattered across the floor, Fiona's books on the shelves, Quinton's tools by the door, flowers in every available container. "I want more," Quinton said suddenly. Fiona pulled back to look at him. "More what?" "More of this. More children, more years, more everything. I want to grow old with you on this mountain, surrounded by our family. I want to watch James grow up and have children of his own someday. I want it all." Fiona smiled, rising on her toes to kiss him. "Then let us have it all, together." Time passed in the way it does when life is full and happy, the days blending together but each one precious. James grew into a bright, active toddler who kept his parents constantly on their toes. He learned to walk early, pulling himself up on furniture and stumbling around the cabin with determination. He babbled constantly, his first clear word, "Papa," making Quinton's chest puff with pride. When James was nearly 2, Fiona discovered she was pregnant again. This time the symptoms were familiar, and she recognized them immediately. Quinton was just as thrilled as he had been the first time, though slightly less anxious now that he knew what to expect. This pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because Fiona was busy chasing a toddler and had less time to focus on discomforts. She grew round again, and James seemed fascinated by the changes in his mother's body, patting her belly and talking to the baby inside in his limited vocabulary. Their second child, a daughter, was born in spring of 1881 during a thunderstorm that rolled through the mountains with dramatic flair. The labor was faster than with James, and the same doctor arrived just in time to catch the baby as she made her entrance into the world. Quinton had wanted to name her Flora, after all the flowers that had brought them together, but Fiona suggested Felicity instead, saying she wanted their daughter to have her own identity apart from their love story. Quinton agreed, though he insisted her middle name be Rose. Felicity Rose Wade had her mother's blonde hair and delicate features, though her personality quickly proved to be anything but delicate. She was a fierce baby, demanding and loud, with a will of iron from her first breath. James, now old enough to understand he had a sister, was initially fascinated and then occasionally resentful of the attention she required. Fiona and Quinton navigated the challenges of two young children with humor and patience, though there were certainly days when they fell into bed exhausted and wondered what they had gotten themselves into. But even in the chaos, there was joy. James's delight when Felicity first smiled at him, Quinton teaching his son to be gentle with his baby sister, Fiona nursing Felicity while reading to James. All of it wove together into a family tapestry that was beautiful in its imperfection. As the children grew, the cabin seemed to shrink. Quinton began planning another addition, a second bedroom so James and Felicity could each have their own space as they got older. He worked on it during the summers, fitting the construction around his prospecting and hunting, determined to provide his growing family with everything they needed. Fiona expanded her gardens further, teaching James to help her plant and weed and harvest. He loved being outside, loved the mountains and wild spaces the way his father did. She told him stories about the flowers and plants, passing on the knowledge Quinton had taught her and adding her own observations. Felicity, once she could walk, proved to be fearless, climbing everything she could reach and giving her parents constant heart attacks. She had Quinton's adventurous spirit but Fiona's strategic mind, a combination that meant she usually succeeded in her mischievous endeavors. The children adored their father, following him around the property whenever he was home, begging for stories of bears and mountain lions. Quinton was patient with their endless questions, teaching them to respect the wilderness while not fearing it. He showed James how to track animals and fish in the creek, and though Felicity was still too young, he promised she would learn everything her brother did. Life on the mountain was not easy, but it was good. There were hardships, winters that seemed endless, illnesses that sent them scrambling for the doctor, wildlife that threatened their livestock, lean times when Quinton's prospecting did not pan out and they had to be creative with their resources. But through it all, they had each other. Fiona sometimes thought about the woman she had been before Quinton, lonely and invisible in San Bernardino, convinced she would never matter to anyone. That woman felt like a stranger now. She had become someone new on this mountain, someone strong and capable and loved. She was a wife, a mother, a homesteader, a teacher to her children, a partner in every sense of the word. And every morning, without fail, Quinton still brought her flowers. Sometimes it was a single bloom when winter made picking slim. Sometimes an elaborate bouquet when the mountain meadows were bursting with color. But always, there were flowers, his daily reminder that he chose her, that he loved her, that she was worth the effort. One morning when James was 5 and Felicity was 3, Fiona woke to find Quinton already up despite the early hour. She found him on the porch, watching the sunrise paint the peaks pink and gold, a bouquet of early spring wildflowers in his hands. Could not sleep. She asked, coming to stand beside him. Quinton wrapped his free arm around her, pulling her close. I was thinking about the first time I saw you, lugging that laundry basket down the street. You looked so determined and so tired all at once. I thought you were the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. Fiona laughed softly. I must have looked a mess. You looked real, Quinton said. Genuine, like someone who faced life head-on and did not complain about the hard parts. I fell a little bit in love with you right then, though I did not know it yet. And now, Fiona prompted, leaning into his warmth. Now I am completely in love with you. More than I was yesterday, less than I will be tomorrow. It just keeps growing, Fiona. I did not know that was possible. She turned to kiss him, tasting coffee and morning on his lips. I love you too. So much it scares me sometimes. Nothing to be scared of, Quinton said, handing her the flowers. We have got each other, we have got our kids, we have got this mountain. That is everything that matters. They stood together watching the day wake up, and Fiona thought about how far they had come from those early uncertain days. They had built something lasting here, something that would outlive them in the children they were raising and the love they shared. James emerged from the cabin rubbing sleep from his eyes, followed by Felicity, who was dragging her favorite stuffed animal. They ran to their parents, and Quinton scooped them both up with easy strength, making them shriek with laughter. What are we doing today, Papa? James asked eagerly. Well, I thought we might check the fish traps in the creek, then help your mama in the garden. Sound good? Both children cheered their approval, and Fiona smiled at her family, her heart full to bursting. This was her life now, so different from what she had imagined for herself, but so much better than anything she could have dreamed. The years continued to pass, marked by the changing seasons and the growth of their children. James became Quinton's shadow, learning everything his father could teach him about surviving and thriving in the mountains. He had his father's size and strength, shooting up tall and broad-shouldered, but his mother's gentle heart. He was protective of Felicity, despite her protests that she did not need protecting, and he worked hard at everything he attempted. Felicity grew into a spirited girl who could outclimb most boys and was not afraid to get dirty. She learned to shoot almost as well as her brother, and she had a gift for drawing that she got from Fiona's mother. She filled notebooks with sketches of the mountains and wildlife, creating a visual record of their lives. When James was 8 and Felicity was 6, Fiona found herself pregnant once more. This pregnancy came as a surprise, as she had thought they might be done having children, but she and Quinton welcomed it nonetheless. Their third child, another boy they named Frederick Thomas Wade, was born healthy and calm, the easiest of their babies. James and Felicity doted on their little brother, fighting over who got to hold him and help care for him. Frederick seemed content to be passed between family members, rarely crying and sleeping better than his siblings ever had. Quinton joked that they had finally figured out this parenting thing, and Fiona laughed, knowing full well that every child was different and Frederick was simply blessed with an easy temperament. The cabin had grown over the years with Quinton's additions until it was a proper house, spacious enough for their family of 5 with room to spare. The gardens Fiona tended were extensive now, providing much of their food and all of their beauty. Quinton had found a decent vein of silver on his claim, and while not making them rich, it provided enough income that they lived comfortably. They made regular trips to San Bernardino so the children could experience town life and Fiona could maintain friendships there. But they always returned to the mountain with relief, grateful for the quiet and space of their homestead. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Quinton surprised Fiona with a trip, arranging for a neighbor to watch the children so he could take his wife to see the ocean she had always dreamed of. They rowed to the coast, and Fiona stood on the sand with tears streaming down her face as she saw the endless expanse of water for the first time. "It is more beautiful than I imagined," she whispered. Quinton pulled her close. "You deserve to see beautiful things, Fiona. You deserve everything." They spent 3 days at the coast, walking on the beach and talking like they had in their early courting days, remembering who they were beyond being parents and homesteaders. It rekindled something between them, not that their love had dimmed, but the intensity of their early passion that sometimes got lost in the day-to-day responsibilities of family life. When they returned home, the children mobbed them with stories and hugs, and Fiona realized that while she had enjoyed their getaway, there was nowhere she would rather be than here, surrounded by her family in the home they had built together. Life settled into a comfortable pattern. Quinton continued his prospecting and hunting, James helping more and more as he grew older and stronger. Fiona taught all 3 children to read and write and do arithmetic, giving them the education she had missed out on. Felicity discovered a talent for growing things, taking over portions of the gardens and experimenting with new plants. Frederick, as he grew, proved to be mechanically minded, constantly taking things apart to see how they worked and usually managing to put them back together. The children grew healthy and strong, shaped by the mountain life into capable, confident people. They knew hardship and hard work, but they also knew love and security. They understood that family meant supporting each other through difficulties and celebrating each other's successes. On a summer evening when James was 15 and talking about his future, wondering if he should stay on the mountain or seek opportunities in town, Quinton shared his own story of leaving Ohio and finding his way west. "The important thing," he told his son, "is to choose what makes you happy, not what you think you should do. I came to these mountains because I needed solitude and space to grieve. I stayed because I found purpose in the wild places. Then I met your mother and everything changed again." Life will keep changing, James. The trick is to be honest with yourself about what you want and brave enough to go after it. James absorbed this thoughtfully, and eventually decided to stay on the mountain for now, working his own trap lines and helping Quinton with the silver claim. Fiona was secretly relieved, not ready to see her oldest child leave home, but she knew the day would come eventually. Felicity declared she would never leave the mountain, that she would live there forever and paint it in every season until she ran out of paper. Frederick, still young, changed his mind daily about what he wanted to be when he grew up, ranging from a blacksmith to an engineer to a shopkeeper. Fiona and Quinton listened to their children's dreams and encouraged them all, knowing that whatever paths they chose, they had given them a foundation of love and confidence to build on. More years passed. James, at 19, met a girl from San Bernardino on one of their supply trips and began courting her seriously. Quinton watched his son navigate romance with amused recognition, seeing his own younger self in James's earnest devotion. The girl, Sarah, was a teacher's daughter with a practical mind and a kind heart, and when James proposed and she accepted, both families celebrated. The wedding was held at the mountain homestead, with people coming from all over to witness the union. It was a joyful affair, and watching her son marry reminded Fiona of her own wedding day, of standing before God and community and promising her life to Quinton. "We are getting old," she murmured to her husband as they watched James and Sarah dance. Quinton looked down at her, his hair now streaked with gray but his body still strong and capable. "Maybe so, but I am not done with you yet, Fiona Wade. We have got a lot of years left in us." She smiled and leaned into him. Good, I am not done with you either. James and Sarah built a cabin on the far edge of the property, close enough for family but far enough for privacy. Felicity, at 17, had started selling her paintings to a gallery in San Bernardino and was making a name for herself as an artist. Frederick, 13 and growing fast, had apprenticed with the blacksmith in town and showed real promise at the trade. The homestead that had started as just Quinton's small cabin had become a family compound, multiple generations working the land and supporting each other. It was everything Quinton had dreamed of when he first told Fiona he wanted a home, not just a dwelling. On a morning in the spring of 1893, Fiona woke to find a bouquet of flowers by her bedside as always, but this time with a note tucked among the blooms. She opened it carefully, recognizing Quinton's careful handwriting. 15 years ago today, I left the first flowers at your door. You have made every day since then worth living. I love you more than words can express. Forever yours, Quinton. Fiona felt tears prick her eyes. 15 years since those first mysterious bouquets, and he still made the effort every single morning. She found him on the porch, watching the sunrise as he often did, and wrapped her arms around him from behind. "Thank you for the flowers," she said. "For all of them, every single one for 15 years. Quinton turned to pull her into his embrace. "Thank you for accepting them, for taking a chance on a rough mountain man who did not know the first thing about courting a lady." "You knew exactly what you were doing," Fiona corrected. "You knew I needed to feel seen and valued. You gave me that with every bouquet." They stood together as the sun rose higher, warming the mountain, and Fiona thought about the journey that had brought them here. From lonely laundress and isolated mountain man to this, a full, rich life surrounded by family and love. James and Sarah welcomed their first child later that year, a baby girl they named Violet. Quinton held his granddaughter with tears in his eyes, this tiny new life that carried forward the family he and Fiona had created. Fiona watched her husband with their grandchild and fell in love with him all over again, seeing the gentleness he showed, the reverence for this next generation. As the children grew older and built their own lives, Fiona and Quinton found themselves with more time alone together, reminiscent of their early years. They took long walks through the mountains, visited their favorite spots, talked about everything and nothing. The passion of youth had mellowed into a deep, abiding love that needed no words, a comfort and companionship that sustained them both. On their 20th anniversary, their children threw them a surprise party, gathering extended family and friends from miles around. There were speeches and toasts, stories told and memories shared. Quinton stood to address the assembled crowd, his arm around Fiona. 20 years ago, I married the woman who changed my life," he said, his deep voice carrying across the gathered crowd. "I thought I knew what I wanted when I came to these mountains, but I was wrong. I wanted solitude when what I needed was partnership. I wanted isolation when what I needed was love. Fiona gave me all of that and more. She gave me a family, a home, a reason to wake up every morning grateful to be alive. So here is to 20 more years, and then 20 after that, and as many as God sees fit to give us." The crowd cheered and clinked glasses, and Fiona stood to add her own words. "Quinton once told me I had never been given flowers before, and he made it his mission to change that. But the flowers were just the beginning. He gave me confidence, love, purpose, and family. He gave me a life beyond anything I dared dream. I would choose him again every single day." They kissed to applause and whistles, and the party continued long into the night. Their children and grandchild, their friends and neighbors, all gathered to celebrate a love that had started with simple wildflowers and grown into something extraordinary. As Fiona and Quinton grew older, they slowed down somewhat but never stopped working. The homestead required constant maintenance, and they both took pride in keeping it thriving. Quinton's body showed the wear of years of hard labor, old injuries aching in cold weather, but he remained strong and capable. Fiona's hands were permanently marked by years of work, but they were skilled and sure. James took over more of the prospecting and hunting, while Felicity managed the gardens that had grown beyond what Fiona could handle alone. Frederick, now a skilled blacksmith, provided tools and repairs for the whole family. They all worked together, supporting each other just as Quinton and Fiona had always supported each other. More grandchildren came, James and Sarah having 2 more children, and Felicity eventually marrying a quiet man who appreciated her artistic spirit and giving Quinton and Fiona 2 more grandchildren to spoil. Frederick married young to a girl from town, and they added 3 more to the growing family tree. The homestead rang with the sounds of children playing, multiple generations living and working together in harmony. It was loud and chaotic and absolutely perfect. On the morning of Fiona's 50th birthday, she woke to find not just flowers by her bedside, but Quinton sitting in the chair watching her with a soft smile. "Good morning, beautiful," he said, just as he had said countless mornings before. "Good morning," Fiona replied, stretching. "You are up early even for you." "I wanted to be the first to wish you happy birthday," Quinton said. He stood and came to sit on the edge of the bed, taking her hand. 50 years old. Can you believe it?" Fiona shook her head. "Sometimes it feels like I was just that 23-year-old laundress yesterday. Other times it feels like I have lived several lifetimes." "You have lived well," Quinton said firmly. "Look at everything we have built. Look at our family, our home, the life we share." "I could not be more proud of you, Fiona Wade. We built it together," Fiona reminded him. "Every bit of it." Later that day, the family gathered for a celebration. The children had prepared a feast, and the grandchildren presented Fiona with handmade gifts, drawings and carvings and pressed flowers. Sarah had sewn her a beautiful quilt, and Felicity had painted a portrait of the homestead that captured it perfectly in all seasons. But the gift that made Fiona cry came from Quinton. He presented her with a wooden box he had carved himself, and when she opened it, she found dried flowers from every year of their marriage, carefully preserved and labeled with the dates. "I saved one from every bouquet I gave you," he explained quietly. "A record of all the mornings I got to wake up loving you." Fiona could barely see through her tears as she looked at the collection, physical proof of 22 years of daily devotion. "Quinton, this is the most beautiful thing anyone has ever given me." "You are the most beautiful thing that ever happened to me," he replied, pulling her into his arms. The party continued around them, but in that moment, it was just the 2 of them, the mountain man and the laundress who had found each other against all odds and built a love that would last forever. As the years continued to pass, Fiona and Quinton settled into the comfortable rhythms of their elder years. They still worked, but at a slower pace, spending more time enjoying what they had built than constantly building new things. They took pleasure in watching their grandchildren grow, in passing on their knowledge and stories to the next generation. Quinton still brought Fiona flowers every morning without fail. Sometimes he had to walk farther to find them, and sometimes in the depths of winter it was just evergreen boughs or bare branches with interesting shapes. But always there was something to mark the day, to say without words that he loved her still. On quiet evenings, they would sit on the porch together, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of purple and gold, and talk about their journey. From those first mysterious bouquets to this moment, surrounded by the family and life they had created together. "You ever regret it?" Fiona asked one such evening. "Giving up your solitude for all this noise and chaos?" Quinton looked at her like she had sprouted a second head. "Regret? Fiona, you are my greatest adventure. This family, this life, it is everything I never knew I needed. I would do it all again in a heartbeat." "Even the parts where the children kept us up all night," Fiona teased. "Even those parts," Quinton confirmed with a laugh. "Well, maybe I would not mind a bit more sleep now and then. But yes, all of it. Every moment." They sat in comfortable silence, hands intertwined, watching as their grandchildren played in the yard below. James and Sarah's youngest was teaching Frederick's middle child to fish, while Felicity's artistic daughter sketched them both. It was a scene of simple domestic joy, the kind of moment that made up a life. "I love you, Quinton Wade," Fiona said softly. "Thank you for seeing me all those years ago. Thank you for the flowers and the life and everything in between." "I love you too, Fiona Wade," Quinton replied, bringing her hand to his lips. "Thank you for saying yes to a mountain man's clumsy courting. Thank you for building this with me." As the sun set and the stars began to emerge, they remained there together. Two people who had started as strangers and become essential parts of each other. The mountain stood eternal around them, witness to their love story, and the flowers Fiona had carefully tended bloomed in the gardens, a living testament to where they had begun. Their story was not one of grand gestures or dramatic rescues, though there had been moments of both. It was instead a story of small daily choices, of showing up for each other every morning, of building something lasting through patience and work and unwavering commitment. It was the story of a man who brought flowers and a woman who had never received them, of two lonely people who found in each other not just companionship, but completion. It was a love story that would echo through generations, told and retold by their descendants, a reminder that sometimes the most extraordinary things begin with the simplest gestures. And every morning, for all the years they were blessed with, Quinton Wade continued to bring his wife flowers, a tradition that would outlast them both and become the defining romantic gesture of their family for generations to come. Because some things, once started with love, should never end.